The grasshoppers had stripped the wheat down to stubble and chewed the paint off barn doors. And now in the cold December of 1874, Eliza Harrison stood in Nathan Morgan's kitchen with her bonnet still tied, and made him an offer that had nothing to do with affection. "Marry me and my family eats," she said, her voice level as a carpenter's square. "I will cook, clean, mend, work your garden, tend your stock if you need it. You get my labor and whatever respectability a wife brings. My mother and my 3 brothers get a roof and food until spring planting. Those are the terms." Nathan stood across the table from her, a tall man of 26 with work-roughened hands and eyes the color of winter sky. He had not invited her to sit, had not offered coffee. He looked at her for a long moment, at the pride holding her spine straight despite the desperation that must have driven her to walk 2 miles in the cold to propose marriage to a man she barely knew. "How old are your brothers?" he asked. 15, 12, and 8. Peter, Samuel, and James. "My mother is 60 and her lungs are not good, but she can still do handwork, sewing, and such. I am 23. I was married to Thomas Harrison for 2 years before the fever took him last spring. I know how to manage a household. I am not asking for affection or anything beyond the arrangement I have outlined." Nathan rubbed his jaw, the rasp of his palm against 2 days of stubble loud in the quiet kitchen. Outside, the wind pushed against the walls. His cattle were lean, but they were alive. He had a dugout full of potatoes and enough cornmeal to last until March if he was careful. He had more than most in Barton County this winter, which was to say, he had enough not to starve. "I will marry you for love or not at all," he said finally. The words came slow, as if dragged up from somewhere deep. "I cannot do it the other way." He took his coat from the peg and walked past her, out into the cold, pulling the door shut behind him with a firmness that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. Eliza stood in his kitchen for a full minute, her mittened hands clenched at her sides, before she walked back out into the December wind. The 2 miles home felt longer than they had coming. She had humiliated herself for nothing. She had offered everything she had to trade, and he had refused her. When she reached the soddy she shared with her mother and brothers, the single room was cold. Peter had let the fire burn too low again. Her mother, Margaret, sat wrapped in 2 quilts, her breathing shallow and whistle thin. "Well?" Margaret asked. He said no. Eliza unknotted her bonnet with stiff fingers. "He wants to marry for love," he said, as if love puts food on the table. Peter, gangly and ashamed, looked up from the corner where he was trying to coax the fire back to life. "I am sorry, Eliza. I should have kept it going hotter. It is all right." She made her voice gentle for him, though her throat ached with unshed tears. "We will manage. We have before." But she did not know if that was true. Thomas had left her with almost nothing. The grasshoppers had taken the rest. She had sold everything that would bring a price. The relief committee had given them flour twice, but the supplies were irregular, and there was talk that much of what was donated never reached the people who needed it. She had $3 left in the world and 4 people depending on her. That night she lay awake on the narrow bed she shared with her mother, listening to the wind scour the prairie, and tried not to think about Nathan Morgan's face when he had refused her. Tried not to wonder what he had meant, love or not at all. As if love were something that mattered when children were hungry, 3 days later Peter came in from checking the snares with a rabbit and a confused expression. "There is firewood," he said, "by the lean-to. A whole cord, maybe more. I did not hear anyone bring it." Eliza went out to look. The wood was stacked neatly, split and ready to burn. Cottonwood and some oak, good burning wood. There were no tracks in the new snow to say who had left it, but she knew. She told herself it was charity, nothing more. He had refused her offer, but he was not a man who could let his neighbors starve. That was all. A week later, a sack of cornmeal appeared on the doorstep, 50 pounds at least. And then in January, when the cold turned vicious and the wind howled for 3 days straight, Peter found a hindquarter of beef hanging in the lean-to, frozen solid, enough meat to last them a month. Eliza said nothing to anyone, but she felt the weight of it like a stone in her chest. He was feeding them, after he had said no, after he had walked out of his own house rather than accept her terms. She did not understand it, and not understanding made her angry in a way she could not quite name. In February, she heard that Nathan Morgan had sold his saddle horses, both of them, fine animals he had raised himself. Sold them to a stockman in Great Bend for a quarter what they were worth in a good year, but cash was cash, and no one had any. A week after that, someone said he had sold his wagon and team, the good rig with the spring seat that he had bought just before the grasshoppers came. He was keeping only one old gelding and a mule. Eliza tried not to think about why a man would sell off his animals. Tried not to let herself wonder what he needed the money for, or whether he was the one leaving anonymous gifts at her door. In March, Nathan took a job freighting for the railroad, hauling supplies from the depot in Great Bend to the work camps pushing west. It was hard, dirty work, and it took him away for days at a time. Eliza heard about it from Mrs. Brennan at the general store, who seemed to think it was a shame, a stockman like Nathan Morgan reduced to freighting. He always seemed the steady type, Mrs. Brennan said, measuring out the 2 pounds of sugar Eliza could afford. Not the kind to hire out, but I suppose we all do what we must. Eliza took her sugar and walked home through mud that sucked at her boots, and she felt something shift inside her, some understanding she was not quite ready to name. April brought rain and the first green shoots of grass, and with it, a growing rumor. The relief agent for the county, a man named Horace Tyndale, was living better than he should. New boots, a gold watch chain. His wife had a silk dress that she wore to church, purple as a bruise and shimmering. Eliza heard the rumors and said nothing, but she thought about them. Thought about the irregularity of the aid, the way some families received help and others did not. The way Tyndale always had a reason why supplies were delayed. She thought about the ledgers he kept in the back room of the store he operated, the store that served as the distribution point for relief goods. She had learned to keep books when she was married to Thomas, had a neat hand and a head for figures. And she had nothing but time now, with the days growing longer and the work still scarce. One evening in late April, she walked into town and stood outside Tyndale's store until he locked up and left. Then she went around to the back, where the door had a loose latch she had noticed before, and let herself in. The ledgers were exactly where she expected them to be, in a cabinet behind the counter. She lit a candle and started reading. It took her 4 nights, coming back each time after Tyndale had gone home, carefully copying figures into a notebook she had brought. Income. Donations received from churches in Chicago, from the State Relief Committee, from private benefactors. Outgo. Distributions to families in need, itemized by date and recipient, except the numbers did not match, not even close. Tyndale was recording distributions that had never happened, pocketing the goods and selling them quietly to people who had money. Flour at 50 cents a pound when the donated flour should have been free. Coal at prices that would have been high even before the grasshopper plague. He had been doing it since December, and he had stolen enough to feed every family in the county for a month. Eliza copied the last page, blew out the candle, and let herself out the back door. Her hands were shaking, but not with fear, with rage. She knew what men like Tyndale counted on, that people who needed help would be too ashamed to ask questions. That desperation made people quiet. that a man with a title and a clean collar would be believed over a poor widow with dirt under her fingernails. But Eliza had learned, in the year since Thomas died, that shame was a luxury she could not afford. And she had the numbers, written in Tyndale's own hand. The State Relief Committee met in Topeka, 2 days away by train. Eliza had never been on a train, had never been further from Barton County than Great Bend, but she took her $3, the last money she had, and bought a ticket. She wore her best dress, the gray wool that had been her wedding dress and was now her only good outfit, mended carefully at the cuffs. She carried the notebook in a cloth bag and kept it on her lap the whole way, as if someone might try to take it from her. Topeka was overwhelming, bigger than she had imagined, full of noise and hurry. She asked directions 3 times before she found the office she needed, in a brick building near the Capitol. A clerk tried to turn her away, but she planted herself in a chair and said she would wait, and eventually they let her in to see a man named Mr. Shepherd, who ran the committee. He was younger than she expected, maybe 35, with tired eyes and ink stains on his fingers. He listened while she explained, and then he read through the notebook, page by page, his expression growing darker. "You copied all of this yourself?" he asked. "Yes, sir, from Mr. Tyndale's ledgers. I can show you which entries do not match the distributions. I kept track of who received what in our township. The numbers are wrong by half, sometimes more." Mr. Shepherd leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Harrison, if what you are saying is true, this is theft on a large scale, but accusing a county agent is serious. There will be an investigation. You will have to testify. Tyndale has friends, political connections. It will not be pleasant for you. I understand." Eliza met his eyes. "But people are hungry and he is stealing food from them. That is not complicated." Mr. Shepherd smiled, a brief, hard smile. "No, I suppose it is not. Leave the notebook with me. I will send investigators within the week." Eliza took the train home with an empty bag and an empty pocket, having spent her last dollar on the return ticket. She walked the 2 miles from the depot to the soddy in the dark, and when she arrived, there were eggs on the doorstep, a dozen of them, carefully packed in straw. She carried them inside and set them on the table, and then she sat down and cried for the first time since Thomas had died, great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Her mother held her and asked no questions, and eventually Eliza slept. The investigators came a week later, 2 men in suits who spent 3 days going through Tyndale's ledgers and interviewing families. Eliza told them everything she knew, standing in Tyndale's store with half the town watching. Tyndale blustered and threatened, but the numbers did not lie. They removed him from his position and brought in a new agent, a quiet older man from Ellsworth who had been a quartermaster in the war. The relief supplies that had been sitting in Tyndale's warehouse, marked as distributed but never given out, were finally delivered to the families who needed them. Flour and cornmeal, coal and seed wheat, blankets and salt pork. It was not enough to undo the winter, but it was something. And it was honest. May came, and with it, planting season. The new agent had seed wheat on loan from the state, to be repaid after harvest. Peter and Samuel worked from dawn to dark, breaking sod and planting, their hands blistered and their backs aching. Eliza worked beside them, and slowly the field behind the soddy turned green. She did not see Nathan Morgan. He was still freighting, gone for days at a time, and when he was home, he kept to his own land. She told herself it was better that way. He had made his position clear. He would marry for love or not at all, and she had no love to give him, only gratitude and a debt she did not know how to repay. But she thought about him. Thought about the firewood and the cornmeal and the meat. Thought about the horses he had sold, the wagon, the job he hated. thought about what it meant that he had fed her family for months and asked for nothing in return. Love or not at all, he had said. And then he had walked out. But he had not stopped caring. The wheat grew tall and green through June, and in July it began to turn gold. There were no grasshoppers this year, just sun and rain and the steady work of summer. The whole county held its breath, afraid to believe in a good harvest after the devastation of the year before. In August, they cut the wheat, and it was good. Not a record crop, but good. Enough to repay the seed loan and have some left to sell. Enough to mean they would not starve next winter. Eliza stood in the field with Peter and Samuel, looking at the stacks of bundled wheat, and felt something loosen in her chest. They had survived. Not comfortably, not easily, but they had survived. In September, with money in her pocket for the first time in a year, Eliza went into town and talked to Mrs. Brennan about renting the back room of the general store. She had been thinking about it for weeks, turning the idea over in her mind. She knew how to bake, had a light hand with bread and a way with pies. There was no bakery in town, and people were starting to have money again, just a little. Enough to buy a loaf of bread or a sweet on Sunday. Mrs. Brennan agreed to the rental, $5 a month, and Eliza spent another $10 on supplies. Flour and sugar, lard and salt, a second-hand mixing bowl and a set of pans. She started small, just bread at first, baking in the early mornings and selling out by noon. By October, she had a reputation. Her bread was good, her prices fair, and she never shorted a measure. She hired a girl from town to help with the baking, and then she added pies. Apple when she could get the fruit, dried peach otherwise, and a molasses custard that sold out every time. She moved her mother and brothers into a small house in town, 2 rooms and a kitchen, rented but solid. Peter found work at the livery, Samuel at the grain elevator. James started school. Margaret's breathing was better away from the soddy, and she did mending for customers, adding a little to the household income. Eliza had her own money, her own business. She owed no one. For the first time in her life, she was not dependent on a man's goodwill or a husband's decisions. It felt like freedom, fragile and new. But at night, when the baking was done and the town was quiet, she thought about Nathan Morgan. Wondered if he was still freighting or if he had come home now that harvest was over. Wondered if he thought about her. Wondered what it would mean to marry for love when you had learned to survive on your own. In November, she saw him in town. He was coming out of the feed store, looking thinner than she remembered, his coat worn at the elbows. He saw her at the same moment, and they stood on opposite sides of the street, looking at each other across the rutted mud of the road. Eliza raised a hand, a small wave. Nathan touched the brim of his hat, and then he turned and walked away, and Eliza felt something crack inside her chest. She went back to the bakery and kneaded bread with a fierceness that left her arms aching, and she did not let herself cry. 2 weeks later, on a cold morning in late November, Eliza closed the bakery early and walked out to Nathan's place. The 2 miles felt both longer and shorter than they had a year ago, when she had walked this same road to offer him a bargain. She found him in the barn, mending harness. He looked up when she came in, his hand stilling on the leather, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "I want to ask you a question," Eliza said finally. Her voice was steady, but her heart was pounding hard enough to hurt. "And I want you to answer honestly." Nathan set down the harness. "All right. Last December I came to you with a proposal. Marry me and my family eats, I said. And you said you would marry for love or not at all. Then you walked out, I remember. But you fed us anyway all winter. The firewood, the cornmeal, the meat, that was you, was not it?" Nathan was quiet for a moment, and then he nodded. "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her, and his eyes were the same winter blue she remembered, but there was something in them now that had not been there before. Or maybe it had always been there, and she had been too desperate to see it. "Because I have loved you since the day you brought those eggs to the church social last September," he said. "Before the grasshoppers, before you were widowed. I saw you laugh at something your brother said, and I thought I had never seen anyone so alive. And then your husband died and the grasshoppers came, and you had so much grief I could not add to it by speaking. When you came to me in December, I wanted to say yes, wanted it so badly I could taste it, but not like that, not as a transaction. I could not bear to have you in my house, in my bed, knowing you were only there because you had no choice. So I said no. And then I could not let you starve, so I did what I could." Eliza felt tears on her face, hot against her cold cheeks. "You sold your horses, your wagon. I did not need them as much as you needed food. You took work you hated. It was only freighting. It did not kill me. Nathan." His name came out broken. "You should have told me. What would you have said? You were grieving, you were desperate. I was not going to use that." Eliza crossed the space between them, and she put her hands on his chest, felt his heart beating strong and steady under her palms. "I came here to ask you a different question than I asked last year." Nathan went very still. "What question is that?" "Marry me for love," she said. "Not for my labor or your name or because anyone needs to eat. Marry me because I have spent a year learning how to stand on my own, and now that I can, I choose you. I choose you, Nathan Morgan, because you are good and kind and stubborn, and because when I think about the rest of my life, I want you in it. Not as a bargain, but as a partner. Not because I need you, but because I love you." Nathan made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Yes," he said against her hair. "Yes, Eliza. God, yes." She tilted her face up, and he kissed her, and it was nothing like the polite kiss she had exchanged with Thomas on their wedding day. It was hungry and desperate and full of a year's worth of longing, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both shaking. "When?" Nathan asked. "When can we marry?" "Whenever you want. Tomorrow, if you can arrange it." He laughed, a real laugh this time, and it lit up his whole face. "Give me a week. I want to do it right. I want everyone to know I am marrying you because I love you and you are marrying me for the same reason." They married the second week of December, exactly a year after Eliza had first proposed, in the church with half the county in attendance. Eliza wore a new dress, deep blue wool that she had sewn herself, and Nathan wore a suit he had borrowed from a friend because he had sold his own for seed money. Peter and Samuel stood up with them, grinning, and Margaret cried happy tears for the first time in years. After the ceremony, they went back to Nathan's place, which was now Eliza's place too. The house was small but well built, and Nathan had cleaned it until it shone. There were curtains in the windows that he had bought from Mrs. Brennan, and a new quilt on the bed that Margaret had made as a wedding gift. That night, lying in Nathan's arms in the darkness, Eliza felt a peace she had not known was possible. "I never thought I would marry again," she said softly. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over." Nathan kissed her forehead. "Are you glad you were wrong? So glad." She turned to face him, her hand on his cheek. "I love you, Nathan. I do not think I knew what that meant before, but I know now. It means choosing you every day. It means trusting you with the parts of me that are frightened and broken. It means building something together that neither of us could build alone." "I love you too," he said, "and I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you." They settled into married life with the easy rhythm of two people who had both learned to work hard. Nathan went back to ranching, building up his herd slowly. Eliza kept the bakery, hiring another girl to help so she could spend more time at home. They worked the land together, planting and harvesting, and they made a good team. In the spring of 1876, Eliza discovered she was pregnant. She told Nathan on a Sunday morning in May, standing in the kitchen with bread rising on the counter and sunshine streaming through the windows. Nathan picked her up and spun her around, laughing, and then set her down carefully as if she might break. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Eliza, we are going to have a baby." "We are," she confirmed, smiling. "In December, I think. A winter baby." He kissed her, gentle and reverent, and then he knelt down and pressed his ear to her stomach, even though there was nothing to hear yet. "Hello in there," he said softly. "I am your father, and I already love you more than anything." Eliza ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The summer of 1876 brought another good harvest, better than the year before. The grasshoppers were a memory now, the land green and productive again. Barton County was recovering, slowly but surely, and there was hope in the air that had been absent for so long. In August, Eliza and Nathan decided to host a harvest home supper at their place, inviting everyone who had helped them through the hard times. Margaret and the boys came, of course, and Mrs. Brennan and her husband, and a dozen other families from the township. Even Mr. Shepherd, the State Relief Committee chairman, made the trip from Topeka when he heard about it. They set up tables outside under the cottonwood trees, and Eliza baked for 3 days straight. Bread and pies, cakes and cookies, a feast to celebrate survival and community and the kindness of neighbors. Nathan roasted 2 lambs and a pig, and there were vegetables from the garden and fresh butter and honey. It was more food than anyone had seen in 2 years, and the abundance felt like a miracle. As the sun set and the lanterns were lit, people ate and talked and laughed. Children ran wild through the fields, and someone brought out a fiddle, and there was dancing. Eliza stood with Nathan's arm around her, watching, her hand resting on the swell of her belly. She felt the baby move, a flutter like butterfly wings, and she smiled. "Are you happy?" Nathan asked, his voice low and warm in her ear. "I am," she said. "I did not think I could be after everything, but I am." "Good." He kissed her temple. "You deserve to be happy, Eliza. You deserve everything good." In December, when the first snow fell, Eliza went into labor. Margaret and Mrs. Brennan attended her, and Nathan paced in the kitchen until Margaret finally took pity on him and led him into the bedroom. He held Eliza's hand through the last hours, and when the baby finally came, squalling and red-faced and perfect, he cried as hard as Eliza did. "A boy," Mrs. Brennan announced, wrapping the baby in a soft blanket. "A fine, healthy boy." Nathan held his son with shaking hands, looking down at the tiny face with an expression of such overwhelming love that Eliza felt tears spill over again. "What should we name him?" she asked. Nathan looked at her and then back at the baby. "I was thinking Gideon," he said. "If you like it, it means mighty warrior. I thought after everything we fought to get here, it seemed right." Eliza smiled. "Gideon Morgan, I love it." They had a celebration that Christmas, small and quiet, just family. Margaret held her grandson and marveled at his tiny fingers. Peter, Samuel, and James took turns peering at the baby with a mixture of awe and confusion, not quite sure what to make of the small creature who had invaded their lives. Eliza watched them all from the rocking chair Nathan had made for her, Gideon sleeping in her arms, and she felt a contentment that went bone deep. "This is what I wanted," she said to Nathan later, when everyone had gone home and the house was quiet. "Not last year when I came to you desperate. But now, this. A family built on love, not necessity." Nathan sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "We have that," he said. "We have that and more." As winter turned to spring, and Gideon grew from a tiny newborn into a baby with Nathan's blue eyes and Eliza's stubborn chin. They settled into the rhythms of parenthood. Sleepless nights and endless diaper changes, the first smile and the first laugh, the everyday miracles of watching a child discover the world. The bakery continued to thrive, and Eliza hired a full-time manager so she could spend more time at home. Nathan's herd grew, and he bought back one of the horses he had sold, a mare he had raised from a foal and had missed terribly. In the summer of 1877, they held another harvest home supper, and this time Gideon was there, 6 months old and charming everyone who looked at him. Eliza set his basket by the stove in the kitchen, where it was warm and safe, and he slept through most of the evening, content in the way of babies who are well loved. Mr. Shepherd attended again, and he pulled Eliza aside at one point in the evening. "I wanted you to know," he said, "that what you did exposing Tyndale, it changed things. We have new oversight procedures now, better accountability. It is harder for men like him to steal from people who are desperate. You did that, Mrs. Morgan. You made a difference." Eliza felt a flush of pride. "I just did what needed to be done." "Most people do not," Mr. Shepherd said. "That is what makes you remarkable." As the evening wore on and the stars came out, Nathan found Eliza in the kitchen, checking on Gideon. The baby was awake, blinking up at the world with curious eyes. "Dance with me," Nathan said, holding out his hand. Eliza laughed. "I should be serving dessert." "Dessert can wait. Dance with me, Eliza." She took his hand, and he pulled her outside to where couples were swaying to the fiddle music. They danced slowly, Nathan's hand warm on her back, Eliza's head resting on his shoulder. "I was thinking," Nathan said after a moment, "about that day you came to me. December of '74. You were so fierce, so determined. You had lost everything and you were still fighting." "I was desperate," Eliza said. "I did not know what else to do." "You were brave," Nathan corrected, "and I was a coward. I should have told you I loved you right then." Eliza pulled back to look at him. "If you had, I would not have believed you. I would have thought you were taking advantage." "It had to happen the way it did, Nathan. I had to learn to stand on my own before I could stand with you." He smiled, and in the lantern light, he looked young and happy and completely at peace. "I suppose you are right, but I am still glad we are here now." "So am I," Eliza said, and she kissed him, right there in front of everyone, because she could and because she wanted to and because she was deeply, profoundly in love with her husband. The years that followed were good ones. Not easy, because farming and ranching were never easy, but good. They had their struggles, the droughts and the hard winters and the illnesses that came with raising children in a time when medicine was uncertain. But they had each other, and they had a community that looked out for its own, and that was enough. In 1878, Eliza gave birth to a daughter they named Josephine, a dark-haired, dark-eyed little girl who had her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength. Gideon adored his baby sister, toddling after her and trying to help in the way of 2-year-olds, which was to say he mostly got in the way, but his heart was in the right place. Margaret lived with them now, her health too fragile for her to manage on her own. She doted on her grandchildren and helped with the household work when her breathing allowed. Peter had married and started his own farm. Samuel was apprenticed to the blacksmith in town, and James was talking about becoming a teacher. The bakery had expanded, and Eliza now owned the building outright. She had 3 employees and a steady stream of customers, and she was thinking about opening a second location in Great Bend. Nathan's herd was one of the largest in the county, and he had a reputation for raising good cattle and dealing honestly. They were prosperous, not wealthy but comfortable, with a future that looked bright. In 1880, Eliza gave birth to another daughter whom they named Tabitha. She was a sunny-natured baby, always smiling, and she fit into their family as if she had always been there. Nathan built an addition onto the house, more bedrooms and a bigger kitchen, and he planted an orchard behind the barn, apple and peach trees that would take years to bear fruit, but would be there for their children and grandchildren. "I am building a legacy," he told Eliza one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Gideon and Josephine chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Not just for us, but for them. I want them to have something solid, something that will last." Eliza took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You are a good father, Nathan Morgan." "I try," he said. "I want them to know they are loved. I want them to grow up feeling safe and secure, the way I did not always feel as a child." Eliza knew his story, the early years of hardship and uncertainty before his family had settled in Kansas. She squeezed his hand. "They know. Look at them. They are happy, healthy, loved. You have given them that." Nathan smiled, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out one by one and the children's laughter filled the warm summer night. In 1882, when Gideon was 6 and already talking about being a rancher like his father, and Josephine was 4 and determined to run the bakery when she grew up, and Tabitha was 2 and into everything, Eliza realized she was pregnant again. She told Nathan on a Sunday afternoon in June, and he laughed and picked her up and spun her around just like he had the first time, even though they were older now and she was heavier, and he groaned a little when he set her down. "Another one," he said, grinning. "Eliza, we are going to need a bigger house." "We have plenty of room," she said, laughing. "And besides, I like a full house. I like the noise and the chaos and the life." "So do I," Nathan admitted. "I love our family, Eliza. I love what we have built together." This baby, another boy, arrived in February of 1883, in the middle of a blizzard that kept the midwife from reaching them in time. Nathan delivered his son with Margaret's help, his hands steady even though his face was pale with fear. They named him Zachary, and he was a healthy, lusty baby who announced his presence with a cry that could be heard across the county. "He has your lungs," Nathan told Eliza, grinning as he placed the baby in her arms. "He has your stubborn streak," Eliza countered, looking down at the red-faced infant who was already rooting for milk. The children were fascinated by their new brother, and Gideon appointed himself Zachary's protector, standing guard by the cradle and reporting any sign of distress. Life continued in its beautiful, chaotic way. The bakery flourished. The ranch expanded. The children grew and thrived. Margaret's health declined slowly, and in the spring of 1885 she passed away peacefully in her sleep, with Eliza holding her hand. They buried her in the churchyard, and Eliza grieved deeply for the woman who had raised her and stood by her through every hardship. But there was comfort in knowing that Margaret had lived to see her grandchildren, had spent her last years surrounded by love and family. "She was so proud of you," Nathan told Eliza after the funeral as they stood in the cemetery looking at the fresh grave. "She told me once that you were the strongest person she had ever known." Eliza wiped her eyes. "I learned from her. She taught me how to keep going when everything seemed impossible." "And you taught me," Nathan said, pulling her close. "You taught me that love is not just feeling, it is action. It is choosing someone every single day, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard." They stood there together, grieving and grateful, bound by years of shared struggle and joy. And when they finally walked back to the house, their children were waiting for them, a reminder that life went on, that love continued, that the legacy they were building was bigger than any one person. In the years that followed, their family continued to grow in love if not in number. Gideon grew into a tall, serious young man who worked the ranch with his father and talked about the future with the quiet confidence of someone who knew where he belonged. Josephine was as determined as ever, and when she was 12, Eliza began teaching her the business side of the bakery. Tabitha was the peacemaker, always finding ways to smooth over conflicts and bring people together. Zachary was wild and joyful, always getting into trouble but so charming that it was hard to stay angry at him. Nathan and Eliza grew older together, their love deepening with every year. They had their disagreements, of course, the small frictions that came with two strong-willed people sharing a life. But they had learned how to fight fair, how to listen, how to forgive. On their 10th anniversary in December of 1886, Nathan gave Eliza a locket with a picture of all 4 children inside. "So you can carry them with you," he said, fastening it around her neck. Eliza gave him a new saddle custom-made by the best craftsman in Great Bend, with his initials tooled into the leather. "So you can ride in style," she said, smiling. But the real gift was the life they had built together, the partnership they had forged, the family they had created. It was more than Eliza had ever dreamed possible on that cold December day when she had walked to Nathan's house to propose a marriage of convenience. She had offered him labor and asked for survival. He had refused, and in refusing, he had given her everything. Time to grieve, time to heal, time to discover her own strength. And when she had finally come to him again, it had been as an equal, as a partner, as a woman who chose love because she wanted it, not because she needed it. That choice had made all the difference. As the years turned and the children grew and the ranch and the bakery both prospered, Nathan and Eliza became pillars of their community. They were the couple people pointed to as an example of what marriage could be, of what partnership looked like. They took in neighbors during hard times, gave quietly to those in need, and always stood up for what was right. In 1890, when there was talk of another corrupt relief agent, Eliza was the first to demand an audit, and her reputation was such that the man resigned before the investigation even began. She had learned that speaking up mattered, that one person could make a difference, and she never hesitated to use her voice. Nathan supported her in everything, just as she supported him. When he wanted to try new breeding techniques, she encouraged him. When she wanted to expand the bakery to Great Bend, he helped her find the building and negotiate the lease. They were partners in the truest sense, each making the other stronger. On a warm evening in September of 1895, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, their children grown or nearly grown, their hair touched with gray, their hands still finding each other across the space between their chairs. "You remember," Eliza said, "when I asked you to marry me for love?" Nathan smiled. "I remember. You stood in my barn and told me you chose me, and I thought my heart would burst." "I meant it," Eliza said. "I still mean it. Every single day, Nathan Morgan, I choose you. I choose this life we have built. I choose love." Nathan brought her hand to his lips and kissed it, his eyes warm with emotion. "And I choose you, Eliza. Then, now, always. For love. Only for love." The sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and they sat together in the gathering darkness. Two people who had found each other in the hardest of times and built something beautiful from the ashes of desperation. Their love story had started with a refusal and a misunderstanding, with hunger and pride and the stubborn determination to survive. But it had become something transcendent, a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger, a love that had been chosen freely and nurtured carefully and cherished completely. And as the stars came out one by one above the Kansas prairie, Nathan and Eliza Morgan sat hand in hand, surrounded by the life they had created, the family they had raised, and the love that had made it all possible. Their story had begun with a proposition and a refusal, but it had become a testament to the truth that the best love is not the one born of necessity, but the one chosen freely, day after day, year after year, for as long as hearts beat and breath remains. The harvest home supper they had hosted all those years ago, with baby Gideon sleeping in his basket by the stove, had been the beginning of a tradition. Every year they gathered their neighbors and friends, their family and community, to celebrate not just the harvest but the bonds that held them together. And every year, as Eliza looked around at the faces she loved, the children who had grown into adults, the grandchildren who were just beginning their own stories, she gave thanks for the day Nathan Morgan had refused to marry her for convenience and had insisted, instead, on love. It had been the refusal that saved them both, the insistence on love that had given them everything. And in the end, that was the legacy they left to their children and their children's children, the knowledge that love freely chosen is the strongest force in the world, capable of surviving grasshopper plagues and corrupt officials, hard winters and uncertain futures. Love chosen, love nurtured. Love lived every single day in 1,000 small acts of kindness and partnership and unwavering commitment. That was the story of Nathan and Eliza Morgan, a cowboy and a widow who found each other in the hardest year Kansas had ever seen, and built a love that would last forever.